Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Dan Miller, the Director of Defense Solutions for SAP Public Services. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today.
Of course. We're going to be talking about the business and operational realities of managing supply chains in denied, degraded, intermittent, and limited environments. Soldiers on the front lines need reliable and accessible information and logistics systems to help them with logistics functions. Supply systems have to have the functions when communications are degraded and networks are compromised. So let's start there. Just to kind of set the stage, could you talk a little bit about why we need disconnected solutions to support supply chain management?
Yeah, I think what we see, particularly with modern combat, but even if you go back as far as the Cold War, the electronic warfare environment creates significant challenges on the battlefield in terms of being detected, being targeted, and being engaged. And so that environment requires units that operate near the front lines, whether they be ships, mobile units, or forward operating bases, to be able to shut down their electronic emissions signature. But what it doesn't do is shut down their need to actually manage their supply chain functions, manage maintenance activities, and continue to operate locally. And so they need some type of capability that gives them the enterprise resource planning systems that they've been used to in a forward operating location where they are subject to the electronic warfare requirements we see on the modern battlefield. And that drives the requirement that we've at SAP created with our solutions to operate whether they're connected, disconnected, or intermittently connected, and still provide the support to those forward units and information back to higher headquarters who needs to understand in real time or near real time what the situation is from a logistics perspective. Because as most folks know, logistics win wars. And we need to have that capability regardless of the electronic warfare environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds easier said than done, but let's talk about how it actually translates into battlefield logistics. Could you elaborate on how disconnected supply chain management supports contested logistics, whether it's enabling edge decision making or whatnot?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing now is an increasing concern about operating in a non-permissive environment. If you're in a permissive environment, it fundamentally doesn't matter from an effectiveness standpoint how many trucks you put on the road, how much material you're moving. It's an efficiency issue, and we've been driving towards efficiency solutions when we had a more permissive environment. Now that the circle has been closed and we're looking at non-permissive environments much more closely with near-peer or peer-to-peer competitions, we have to address the capability that will allow us to move the logistics we need and only the stuff we need in a contested environment. And so the days where we could stockpile the port of Dhahran with massive yards of equipment and materials prior to a combat, and somebody will give us 6 months to build up those supplies, are long past, as we've seen from operations in Ukraine. And so from a contested logistics environment, what I would like to know at the staff headquarters is to understand what is the actual logistics situation of the units that are in the field. What is their operational pace? And if they can't communicate to me, how can I infer what they would need based on their known operational pace? What is their ammunition consumption, fuel, food consumption, and other materials that might be required to sustain combat operations or combat support operations? And so that disconnected supply chain gives us the ability to do what we need out there from an inventory and supply management, from a maintenance management perspective, and then communicate that back to headquarters in real time or near real time, depending on the missions bandwidth that we have based on electronic warfare environments or equipment. And then we can make those decisions to only put in motion the supplies and logistics that are necessary to continue combat operations. If I put less in motion, I have less to be able to target for the enemy. And that's a key consideration in a contested environment. If I put less in motion, I'm also able to put just the things that I need to support combat operations more effectively. And I'm not sitting there moving supplies forward that aren't necessarily needed for combat operations. It's good to have as much fuel as you need or as much food as you need, but you really should just have what you need, not an excessive amount, because then I store it, I stock it, and I move it, and every time I do that in a contested environment, it's a targetable asset. And that's why I think a disconnected solution allows us to provide that capability for combat operations in a contested logistics environment.
And you kind of touched a little bit on it, but building and deploying disconnected logistics solutions present a whole wide range of issues and challenges. Could you talk to some of those key technical challenges for operating supply chain management solutions in a degraded environment?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that everybody pops out there with is synchronization of the data. How do you keep both sides apprised of what is going on, who has what information is needed, and avoid, at its most fundamental level, database reconciliation issues that plague systems that are disconnected and don't have a fully integrated back-end architecture. The other side is a common user interface, not often thought of, but the people that I'm using at headquarters and the people that are operating forward are often one and the same, and so they'll rotate back and forth. And so if I need the flexibility to restaff or move more people forward, I can't have them out there learning a new system and a new user interface and a new way of doing business. And so I want them to have the same common user interface, the same common understanding of the information, so we can start to make decisions from a point of fact a lot quicker, because we're both looking at the same screen, we're looking at the data the same way, and then we can start to make decisions the same way about it. But I'm going to go back to the synchronization issue, and what SAP has done with that is very fundamentally deployed the exact same solution. Our SAP S/4HANA ERP is the same solution operated at a central server at higher headquarters and on remote servers at the forward units, whether those forward units are ashore in a forward operating base or a mobile brigade, or at sea on a ship. Whether that ship is a submarine, a small deck, or a large deck, it's the same system. And so users go back and forth between them. What we've done, though, is we've lightened up the system that's at sea by assigning ownership of the data elements that are required for that particular unit. If I'm at a carrier, for example, I will only have the data that is necessary to operate supply chain management for the ship, the aircraft carrier, and the embarked units that are on that particular carrier. They don't need to carry the entire data set for the entire Navy or Department of Defense. And the same thing happens when I look at Army units. They carry their brigade's data, their battalion's data, or a company if we choose to put a remote server at a company, depending on the operational state. And so we have less data to synchronize, and we establish a master data ownership key that allows us then to synchronize the data back and forth on a regular basis, and we move that data piece by piece. So once a transaction posts, we move that. My messages are in kilobytes, not megabytes or terabytes. I don't have a full-on database replication that happens every single night and then the resultant reconciliation issues. And so by doing that, taking it bit by bit, making sure we've assigned ownership, moving only the objects that are required, we've made those disconnected capabilities accessible on the forward edge of the battlefield as opposed to back in headquarters only. And what that does is allow us to have the same system, user interface, and processes in all locations across the entire force.
And let's talk about what's kind of happening on the ground and about your clients. What are your DoD customers doing today to support disconnected supply chain management?
Yeah, so SAP has a variety of customers here in the United States at the Department of Defense. And then we also have customers that are NATO allies or friendly partner nations that use our SAP Defense Industry solution. Many of those have already deployed this disconnected capability at sea. We have 3 NATO navies that are operating at sea right now, and they're in the process as well of upgrading from the older version to the newer version of SAP. Software continues to modernize and continues to upgrade. We also have allies of the United States that are operating disconnected capabilities on a mobile fashion for their ground or air forces. And they have that on the older solutions as well as migrating up to the newer solutions. Inside the United States Department of Defense, we have projects ongoing right now to start implementation for our disconnected solutions. And those capabilities would provide the forces at sea as well as shore the capabilities that I've talked about for disconnected logistics and advantages to operate in a contested environment. We've seen the platform to operate those units out there in the field or in a sea vary in size. Some units have operated as small as a laptop or a mobile device, and other units have a full-on server in a data center room or in a flyaway kit server, much like we've operated for the last 30 years with forward operating bases and units. And they have the capability to support at those forward locations forces or users ranging from 25 people up to 500-600 people at that location once they establish a local area network. And so we're giving them the flexible capability to do this and they've taken that out there and they've been using it. And what the advantage is that when the ship, in the case of a ship, is at sea conducting maintenance activities, back ashore, the Fleet Maintenance Center can see what issues are being faced by the ship, and when work orders are transferred from the ship to shore, they're prepared to do that work as soon as the ship arrives in port, and vice versa. When the ship has a maintenance action, the supply folks ashore can see what is needed and can move those parts proactively to the ship to address that. Because when we look at maintenance management, the number one problem is, do I have the parts to actually execute that maintenance? And so this kind of solution where I have a disconnected capability is reaping benefits for them to be able to actually execute the maintenance in a much more timely manner rather than tearing equipment apart and cannibalizing other machines to try and get it up and running. And we're seeing those successes with a variety of military forces, both here in the United States and overseas. And I'm happy to discuss that with our customers in greater depth and in a different environment and share mill-to-mill lessons.
Yeah, could you talk to some of those lessons learned throughout the process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons we saw was that the users need to be trained to put the data in the system. And it seems obvious, but I've done projects where we actually had to go out and paint a blue line and write SAP on it and tell the operators in the warehouse, do not move these materials across the line until you've put them inside the SAP system and received them properly. And if there's an error, fix it instead of moving on with your day. Because once they do that, they have forgotten about it and they have started to process the thing, and then the entire material resource planning system falls apart because it thinks you don't have the parts, so it starts pushing more, or you do have the parts because you didn't use them for maintenance, so I have no need to send you the parts. And that was one of the lessons, is make it easy so that the path, the easiest path for users is the path to put it in the system of record, not to write it on a piece of paper and bring it back later. So it's a change management perspective, less about the technical than the change management. The other lesson learned is make sure that you've established a local network that can support RF. Have that capability in the forward operating base, inside the ships where the system is operating, so that you're not required to print out a piece of paper, walk 5 decks down and checklist it off, because that makes it harder to get it back into the system of record. Enable the forces like we see with our commercial customers with mobile devices. And those mobile devices tie back whether they're operating in a connected manner or if they're in the bottom of the 5th deck in a storeroom that they have no reception or an ammunition bunker, and they can sync up later when they get back closer to the office on the ship or the forward operating base. So 2 lessons, change management and RF technology will significantly help in these disconnected environments.
All right, before I let you go, looking ahead, what's next for discontinued supply chain management and what improvements do you plan for the future?
So SAP continues to evolve our software. We release on a quarterly basis improvements that our customers can digest and put into their systems. One of the biggest things that we see in terms of the defense industry solution is that we expand the number of objects that are used. We started out with basic finance, supply, and maintenance management. We continue to enhance those things, and we look forward to enhancing them further with ammunition management, transportation management, a standard U.S. federal finance package, so that we can have those kind of capabilities available to the forward operating forces that are significant. You know, when we look at an aircraft carrier, for example, we have over 5,000 crew members on there operating multiple squadrons and high-tech performance aircraft. And so they need this information out there, and we need to push more information to them that's available. So we continue to expand the number of standard SAP type objects that are managed in a disconnected fashion. We also look at better management tools. As the network of remote servers expands from 20 or 25 to 100 or 400 or 1,000, we provide better and better management tools to understand the connected and disconnected state of those remote servers, how many errors have accumulated from both sides, central to remote, remote to central, and allow capabilities to process those messages and errors in an orderly fashion with a management tool. And then we push functionality to the edge. How do we tie those edge servers out to the devices and equipment that are in the field? And so that I can read information from the trucks, the tanks, the ships, and the aircraft that are out there in the field, ingest that maintenance type information, develop patterns, understand where I'm going to have a fault and what parts are required to support those. And so the story of disconnected for SAP is not specifically supply chain management or finance management. It's an integrated nature of how do I make the organization out there more effective in the field from a maintenance, a supply, and a financial perspective, bringing their operational readiness to the state that it needs to be, and putting more fully mission-capable forces in the field for the commander to utilize in combat or combat support operations.
All right, a lot more to talk about there. We're unfortunately out of time, so let me thank our guest, Dan Miller, the Director of Defense Solutions for SAP Public Services. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're quite welcome. I was happy to be here today.
I'm Anastasia Obis, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Modernization Exchange.